And we are connected. All right. So I'm really glad to resume our meetings and to see all of you. Here is the first meeting of the new academic year for the California Phenomenology Circle. And today we host a presentation on phenomenology and AI. The speaker is Ken Archer. Ken Archer is a PhD researcher in philosophy and cognitive science at Linköping University in Sweden, supervised by Harald Wilche and Mira Aritmo. Sorry, I'm butchering maybe all names here as co-supervisors. His research focuses on phenomenology and science, especially physics, probability, and artificial intelligence. Ken has worked in software and AI for 25 years and today leads Responsible AI at Microsoft, having previously led the Responsible AI at Twitch. He studied phenomenology under Sokolowski at the Catholic University of America, where he earned his MA in philosophy, and at the moment he lives in San Francisco. So the floor is yours. Thanks for presenting today, Ken.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. Really appreciate the opportunity to chat with this group about an important topic. This is a unique group of people. Many of you bring expertise in both these areas, so I'm really looking forward to a good discussion. So why don't I dive right in? All right. So phenomenology emerged out of a sustained philosophical reflection on precisely the same scientific and mathematical traditions, formal logic, naturalized psychology, and the ideal of mechanized cognition that would later give rise to both symbolic and subsymbolic approaches to AI. For this reason, phenomenologists have long found themselves drawn into critical engagement with the conceptual foundations and aspirations of AI. In what follows, we examine the symbolic and subsymbolic approaches in turn, using phenomenological reflection and the insights of key phenomenologists who have engaged AI to progressively deepen our understanding of the AI project. This includes recent developments in large language models. The vision of symbolic AI emerged from the broader conception of intelligence as a computation over symbolic representations, a conception that also underpins the development of computing and computer science. John Hoagland characterized symbolic AI as grounded in the idea that cognition consists of the manipulation, of formal symbols according to syntactic rules, independent of their semantic content. Intelligence on this view is a matter of rule-governed symbol processing, and mental activity is understood as the execution of algorithms on representations of the world. Symbolic AI achieved striking success in the early years of AI, producing expert systems capable of performing at or above human level in narrow domains. These systems showed that within well-defined and structured domains, formal symbolic representations could support sophisticated inference and decision-making. The success of such systems helped to establish symbolism as the dominant paradigm within AI research and adjacent fields like cognitive science and computational linguistics. The first major phenomenological critique of AI, as we all know, was launched by Hubert Dreyfus in the mid-60s, drawing heavily on Heidegger and later Merleau-Ponty. Dreyfus challenged the assumption that human intelligence could be replicated through formal rule following and explicit representation. He argued AI was based on a Cartesian model of mind, a system of clear and distinct internal representations manipulated according to abstract rules, which failed to account for the embodied, contextual, and skillful nature of human understanding. Human cognition, Dreyfus insisted, cannot be adequately captured in the form of situation-independent symbols and rules for the manipulation. Instead, it's always bound up with our absorbed, embodied coping with our environment. In ignoring this fundamental aspect of human cognition, he claims, symbolic AI was doomed to failure. The limits of symbolic AI that emerged in the 70s and 80s lent increasing credibility to Dreyfus's critique. Symbolic systems proved brittle and inflexible outside of narrowly constrained environments, required exhaustive hand-coded rules and ontologies, were both labor-intensive to create and incapable of coping with the ambiguity, nuance, and contextual sensitivity of real-world situations. In 1988, Daedalus published a special issue gathering many of the leading figures in AI research and philosophy to reflect on the progress and prospects of AI. Philosophers contributing were Dennett, Putnam, Dreyfus, and the Husserl scholar Robert Sokolowski, who at the time was consulting for Los Alamos National Laboratory. While Dreyfus critiques symbolic AI for neglecting the embodied, non-conceptual basis of human understanding, Sokolovsky offered a complementary but distinct perspective. Drawing on Husserl's account of logic, Sokolovsky interpreted the use of language central to symbolic AI not as a distortion of human experience, but as a mediator between natural and artificial intelligence. Language embodies thinking because linguistic signs can be taken in two ways. We can think about what the sign expresses or about the sign itself. In fact, words mean things because we always have this double perspective, either focusing on the thing expressed with the words on the margin or on the words and their composition while the things expressed are on the margin. Formal logic and symbolic AI are made possible by a decisive turn towards the words themselves, reflecting on their combinations and interconnections. Rather than rejecting linguistic formalism outright, Sokolovsky treated it as a legitimate idealization of a higher order cognitive capacity, rooted in more basic forms of intentional life. The disagreement between Dreyfus and Sokolovsky, I think many of us know, ultimately turns on how they interpret Husserl's account of how we experience and intend objects in the world. Dreyfus reads Husserl as still relying on a kind of mental representation, an internal content or image that stands between the mind and the world. So, from this perspective, symbolic AI seems to mirror Husserl's mistake. It treats intelligence as something that operates on internal representations detached from embodied engagement with the world. Sokolovsky, by contrast, argues Husserl's view is not representational in this sense. When we perceive or think about something, we're directly related to that object as it appears to us, not through an internal copy or substitute. For Sokolovsky, when we intend something propositionally, when we think or say the ball is smooth, our intention is directed toward the object of the proposition, not to the proposition itself. But we can also reflect on that propositional achievement, particularly when it's frustrated, say when a dent in the ball comes into view, at which point the proposition itself becomes the object of our reflection, now grasped as a supposed proposition, one previously posited by me in naive certainty and now held up against pre-propositional experience to evaluate its truth. What we call symbolic thought, such as asserting propositions or drawing logical inferences, thus builds upon a more basic, pre-reflective familiarity with the world. On Sokolovsky's interpretation, symbolic AI is not fundamentally misguided, but rather a formal idealization of a genuine human capacity, our ability to articulate and reflect upon the ways in which things appear to us in thought and language. It's precisely this dependence of symbolic AI upon our natural capacity to clearly articulate things with concepts that raises questions for Sokolovsky about the prospects for symbolic AI. While formal logic takes as a given the existence of clear and distinct concepts, Husserl knew that many of our concepts are unclear and that we progressively determine concepts in greater clarity and distinctness. So while Sokolovsky agrees with Dreyfus that the prospects of symbolic AI hinge on its access to clear and distinct concepts, Sokolovsky does not regard clarity and distinctness as a distortion of lived experience, but as the ideal towards which intelligence naturally strives. As the limits of symbolic AI became increasingly apparent, the field began to shift toward approaches that bypassed formal logic and clear and distinct representations altogether. This shift gave rise to what is often called subsymbolic AI, systems such as artificial neural networks that model intelligence not through explicit symbolic manipulation, but through adaptive learning from data. So rather than performing reasoning through rule-based inference, these systems adjust connection weights within a distributed network in response to patterns and input-output stimulus-response correlations. Intelligence in this view is not the application of rules to representations of the world, but the emergent product of statistical learning from accumulated experience. From a phenomenological perspective, this turn to ANNs might initially appear as a philosophical course correction, where symbolic AI presupposed an internal detached representation of the world as clear and distinct concepts. Subsymbolic AI aligns more closely with intelligence as an embodied capacity to cope with one's surroundings. The most prominent recent development within the subsymbolic paradigm is the emergence of LLMs, neural networks trained on massive corpora of text to predict and generate language. Like other symbolic systems, LLMs don't manipulate explicit representations. Instead, they learn statistical word co-occurrence patterns across written text, producing outputs that often appear coherent, context-sensitive, and semantically rich. Their uncanny fluency raises a new set of questions. Do LLMs model a meaningful relation to the world, or do they merely simulate the appearance of understanding through surface level statistical regularities? While adoption of subsymbolic methods helps resolve some of the philosophical concerns surrounding AI, the distinctive human capacity highlighted by Sokolovsky to take a reflective distance from direct naive engagement in the world would appear to be lacking in any computational intelligence. The capacity to shift between a direct attending to the world as it appears to us and a reflective attending to the propositions we form about it thus became a central theme in phenomenological reflection on AI, articulated by Hoagland, Sokolovsky, Alva Noé, and Brian Cantwell Smith. In ordinary experience, the world often absorbs our attention so fully that we are unaware of the propositions generated in the naive certainty of experience. At other times, especially when our expectations are frustrated, we step back and attend to the proposition itself, holding it up against the world to assess its truth. This dynamic movement between anticipatory immersion in the world and reflective distance from it raises important questions about how AI systems relate or fail to relate to the world they are designed to model or represent. This capacity for reflective distance, our ability to step back from what we've taken for granted and evaluate whether our propositions remain adequate to the way the world presents itself, is not merely a cognitive function, but an expression of our responsibility to the world. In phenomenological terms, judgment entails a normative relation to the world. We're accountable for the truth of what we assert because the world can show us that we're mistaken. This responsibility is possible only because we can take this reflective stance towards judgments. We can bracket or quote a judgment as claimed, rather than naively expect its confirmation in further experience. That the contrast with AI appears to distinguish this reflective capacity and the normative concern for truth as a unique capacity of natural intelligence is perhaps the central theme of phenomenological reflection on AI. Hoagland argues that computers don't give a damn. Brian Cantwell Smith says that AI cannot distinguish between the world, the that which, and our registrations of the world. Intelligence for Smith is not just an awareness of this distinction, but an existential concern for the difference. With the detachment from the world brought about by our registrations of the world, comes a commitment to the world that constitutes the self as a responsible knower. For humans, according to Alvin Noé, second order acts of reflection and criticism belong to the first order performance itself. And without this second order act of reflection, AI have no dogs in any races. With this responsibility to the world comes the responsibility to the world of other persons. Sokolovsky writes that the capacity to quote another speaker does not just mean that we can repeat the words that someone else has said. It means that we can quote and state how things look to someone else. Thomas Byrne draws on the same Husserlian insights to claim that because we naturally experience written text as written by an author, and authors possess this responsibility to the world, we assume a sincerity, an orientation towards truth behind all text that is in conflict with our active awareness that for LLMs there is no author and thus no responsibility for truth. So, how are we to account then for the striking coherence of most interactions we have with large language models? AI systems may not give a damn, they may lack any responsibility to the world or concern for truth, yet this leaves us with a one sided, skeptical stance towards a technology that, by most experiential accounts, confers tangible capabilities and supports meaningful achievements in people's lives. To understand this apparent paradox, to account for both the persuasive fluency and the essential absence of any world responsibility in LLMs, we must return to the nuanced account of symbolic AI developed by Sokolovsky. As we've seen, language on Sokolovsky's view mediates between natural and artificial intelligence, not because it carries content, but because it has a syntax, a structure that reflects the categorical articulation of experience. LLMs, like symbolic AI before them, leverage this syntactical mediation. But given their far greater flexibility, LLMs are able to capture syntactic relations between vague concepts that fall short of the clarity and distinctness required by symbolic AI and formal logic more broadly. This flexibility is key to their power, but also to their fragility, for it also enables them to capture syntactic pairings that are unmotivated by any underlying world intentionality. To understand how this works, why LLMs can seem so coherent and yet remain disconnected from the world, we must return to the phenomenological account of how language expresses and sediments our perceptual and categorical grasp of the world. In particular, we must attend to how syntax functions as a bridge between lived experience and formalization of language, It's here that we will locate both the source of LLM's capabilities and the proper expectations we should have of these capabilities. It's helpful to contrast this account with an increasingly common interpretation of LLMs, and the one that is dominant in AI research, that language is, in effect, a compression of perceptual stimuli. According to this view, language can be understood as a lower dimensional representation of sensory data, and LLMs as compression algorithms that reproduce perceptual input. On this argument, if LLMs can compress enough of the world's perceptual regularities, then they should be able to generate claims about the world and even correct those claims based on their own AI perception. For phenomenology, the relation between perception and language is different from this compression theory of the sensory grounding of language. In fact, throughout his work, Husserl repeatedly critiqued this type of theory as psychologism, the reduction of truth, judgment, and logical form to a natural scientific account of cognitive capacities, one grounded in empirical regularities rather than the intentional structure of meaning. An assumption behind the compression theory of language and of most theories of perception is that perception involves contact with fully actual, self-enclosed stimuli of sensory world experience. Phenomenologists since Husserl reject this idea that perception is a direct grasp of fully determinate actuality. Perception is horizontal. Every perceptual act synthesizes past, present, and anticipated future appearances into an apperceptive whole. What is given is never self-enclosed, but always radiates towards absent profiles, the unseen side of a tree, the continuation of the melody, that are co-intended within an open horizon. To perceive is not to grasp a finished object, but to anticipate its unfolding. Consider the perception of a tree. A single visual profile does not account for its three-dimensionality, yet we immediately perceive the tree as a spatial unity with a hidden backside. The account of naturalist psychology or psychologism posits a cognitive reconstruction of a depth dimension from discrete sensory data. But our introspective experience of perception does not present us with any isolated visual slices or piecemeal reconstructions. Instead, we experience the tree as a unified three-dimensional object with a hidden backside. Unseen sides are anticipated as possibilities within the perceptual horizon, shaped by past experience and bodily movement. The phenomenological account of perception runs counter to how we generally take perception to work. Perception is a performance and an achievement, and so it's natural that our attention is drawn primarily to the result or product of this achievement, the clear and determinate object constituted before us. The performance itself, the continuous striving to fulfill its anticipations, as for example, moving around a cup, each new profile fulfills or corrects what I expected to see, all of that typically remains in the background. And for this reason, Husserl argues, we're inclined to regard perception as a passive reception of a finished object, as most theories of perception assume, and as most AI research assumes. How does language mediate between perceptual orientation to changing things in the world on the one hand and AI on the other? Well, this striving within perception to confirm its anticipations motivates a higher level grasp where I no longer focus on the shifting views, but on but on what they sustain. For example, the cup is round. Similar process holds for color. Excuse me. As I rotate a red apple, the play of shadow and light varies across profiles, yet I grasp a stable redness. In such moments, perception is lifted into categorical intuition, where properties are intuited as determinate and available from all sides, once and for all. This detachment of categorical properties from particular perceptual structures makes possible predication and reasoning beyond immediate sensory experience. Having abstracted redness from varying light conditions, I can now recognize red objects elsewhere or communicate apples are red to someone who's not looking at one. But categorical intuition, like perception itself, remains horizontal. It's always open to revision. An apple that seemed red in dim light may turn out to be brown when examined more closely. What appeared round may reveal itself to be subtly oval. Categorical acts not only stabilize perception in the moment, they also sediment meaning, particularly when expressed in language. Each predication, this is round, this is red, leaves a trace, shaping habitual expectations. Over time, these sediments can become rigid. We may start to use words like apple or red automatically without reanimating them through fresh perceptual intuition. This is the danger intrinsic to what Husserl calls the sedimentation of sense. Our concepts and language can become thoughtless resistant to correction by new experience. This thoughtless use of language is what symbolic AI and LLMs do by design. When we turn our attention towards language itself, whether in symbolic AI or in LLMs, we are turning our attention quite decisively toward the product of this multi-layered intentional achievement, towards language itself, independent of any awareness of the world. This is the origin of the success and limitations of LLMs. Both symbolic AI and LLMs rely upon the syntax expressed in language that articulates relations between things and their categorical properties, or relations between multiple things registered in categorical intuition. In natural intelligence, we move through perceptual expectations of a physical object whose shape and color perspectives co-vary with our movement through oblong and reddish profiles. Motivated to anticipate the object once and for all, we categorically intuit the syntactical relation object round and object red and can express these categorical intentions in language as ball is red. Further exploration, a hidden side that's dented in black, may frustrate our perceptual expectations, now sedimented in categorical intentions. The responsibility intrinsic to natural intelligence, though, is to the world, to suspend the naivete of our judging and reflect upon the judgment as such. Ball is read as supposed, and evaluate its truth against the evidence of the world. LLMs lack this responsibility to the world because their use of language kicks away the ladder of world intending lived experience that constitutes the categorical meaning of language. But the syntax expressed in language also mediates between natural and artificial intelligence, as Sokolovsky explains in the case of symbolic AI, and in so doing mediates between the world and AI. The predicate of syntax expressed as ball is red articulates the structure of a whole and part, of identity amidst change, registered in categorical intuition. Other syntax articulates other structures in categorical intuition, each with their own expressions in language. Relational syntax, expressed as A is larger than B, or Socrates is the teacher of Plato, expresses relations between multiple objects. Conjunctive and disjunctive syntax, expressed as A and B, and A or B expresses the act of synthesizing or distinguishing multiple intentions, and so on. This syntax is formalized as formal logic, which is then mechanized by symbolic AI. However, formal logic is founded on this lived, intentional experience of disclosing things in ever greater clarity and distinctness. Hence, the challenges identified by Sokolovsky of symbolic AI's ambition to mechanize inference using what are, of necessity, the less than fully clear and distinct, vague concepts of language. LLMs, by learning probabilistic models of word co-occurrence, predicting the next word based on patterns in previous words, also pick up these syntactic structures as expressed in language, specifically in written text. If symbolic AI turns its attention towards language, towards the words toward the ways that words combine, expressing the syntax of formal logic, LLMs turn their attention towards all the language lying around in written text. This gives LLMs a kind of pseudo-sensitivity to the rich ambiguity and openness of human language. They can model how vague terms are used in combination with other vague terms, how justice syntactically pairs with delayed in legal contexts, or how sweet syntactically articulates grief in poetic expression. These patterns reflect real tendencies in human language to navigate the hazy space between vagueness and clarity, a process driven by the same striving for determinacy that motivates categorical perception. In this respect, LLMs are closer to the lived use of language than symbolic AI ever was. But LLMs also model what Husserl would call unmotivated combinations, accidental co-occurrences, fragments, noise, because their learning is driven by brute statistical association rather than motivated anticipations rooted in a lived horizon. LLMs treat all co-occurrence as potentially meaningful. They cannot distinguish between sedimented syntactic forms that emerged through acts of perception and judgment and surface patterns that result from editorial quirks, rhetorical flourishes, or even typographical errors. This is the source of what we call hallucination, the generation of linguistic forms that appear syntactically plausible, yet fail to be answerable to the world because they lack the intentional structure that undergirds truth. Thus, syntax mediates between LLMs and the world only in a derivative and fragile way, where perception and categorical intuition are world intending, directed toward fulfilling anticipations through further exploration. LLMs are text intending, or more accurately, text predicting. They anticipate not what might be revealed in the world, but what might plausibly follow in a corpus. In mimicking the product of human cognitive achievements without participating in the process, LLMs reveal the artificial nature of their intelligence. They show that syntax, detached from the horizontal structure of perception and truth, can float free as a probabilistic artifact, meaningful in form but not in truth. Yet this very limitation also reveals something profound about the nature of language and intelligence. That syntax can be severed from world intending acts and still function in recognizable ways is testimony to the power of sedimentation and to the fact that meaning persists, at least for a time, even when its connection to the world is lost. LLMs exploit this residual structure to encode a world model, albeit one that can't distinguish between motivated and unmotivated word combinations. LLMs can't make this distinction in their world model because they can't reanimate it. To characterize this aspect of AI as a limitation is to misinterpret its promise and its origins in our everyday natural intelligence, whose purposes it serves. We would not expect the syllogism of classical logic to make our breakfast for us. Breakfast comes first, and syllogisms merely articulate syntactical relations that arise within such activity, and once formalized as logic, can help orient it. In the same way, we should not expect LLMs to articulate new distinctions and relations between objects that have not yet dawned upon natural intelligence and been expressed in language. This in no way diminishes their promise, it only corrects the misinterpretation common after achievements in science that they replace the lived experience from which they arose. LLMs do not understand the world, but they do stand as mirrors to our own sedimented understanding, offering a reflection that is illuminating. And while the recent rise of LLMs dominates popular understanding of AI, much of the historical development of ANNs has been oriented not toward language, but perception. The original ambition of ANN research, which continues to dominate many of its most advanced applications today, is to train models that learn to identify patterns in sensory input and then associate those patterns with language. This trajectory reflects a common belief in computational cognitive science that humans acquire a model of the world through sensory motor engagement long before they acquire language. This pre-linguistic world model, often referred to as intuitive physics, grounds later conceptual and linguistic capacities. As robotics pioneer Rodney Brooks famously put it, the world is the model. The field of ANNs occupies a liminal disciplinary space straddling psychology, computer science, neuroscience, and physics. This in between status reflects a deeper historical ambiguity. I argue that ANNs are best understood not as artificial minds, but as the probabilistic turn within psychophysics, a field that began as a branch of physics. Psychophysics studies the lawful correlations between environmental stimuli and physiological responses, such as the relationship between sound frequency and perceived pitch, or brightness and retinal stimulation. The historical and philosophical stakes of this lineage become clearer when we consider how, as interpreted by by Husserl, psychophysics idealizes both the world and perception in ways that are continuous with the logic of mathematical physics. Husserl regarded psychophysics as a valid empirical science, but also carefully distinguished its domain from the domain of meaning and judgment. To understand why psychophysics, and by extension ANN research, constitutes a legitimate science with tremendous achievements, while the attempt to ground conceptual meaning or propositional knowledge in terms of this science misinterprets these achievements, we must return to Husserl's phenomenological account of physics itself. A central theme throughout this presentation has been the striving for clarity and distinctness that animates natural intelligence. In the historical emergence of physics, this striving culminates in a radical abstraction, the constitution of an idealized, mathematically structured nature. In The Crisis of European Sciences, Husserl shows how physics achieves its objectivity not by discovering a separate real world behind appearances, but by idealizing appearances within the everyday life world. It's important to be clear that what is presented here is not a history of physics as an external series of events, but an inner history of the constitution of the meaning of physics that motivates physics internally throughout its history and today, through physics as well as its many spin-off sciences, including psychophysics and ANNs. Classical physics suspends our pre-scientific perspectival perception of things that move in characteristic ways in order to externalize our perception of motion itself as geometric transformations expressible in mathematical equations within a coordinate space. Motion now consists of measured quantities, position, velocity, acceleration, in short, of trajectories, and no longer of qualitative tendencies, no longer of properties or principles of different types of objects. These mathematized trajectories at the heart of physics are purged of the indeterminateness of things in the world, thus achieving the determinate certainty that is frustrated within pre-scientific perceptual experience. The achievements of physics rest on formalizing first-order perceptual intentions, the anticipatory structuring of a stream of perspectives of an object, without elevating them to full categorical grasp. Physics freezes this flow by representing motion as a function of idealized dimensions of continuous space and uniform time. Motion becomes a measurable trajectory, interpolated between exact spatiotemporal coordinates. Within this framework, psychophysics emerges as a natural extension of physics. Like physics, it abstracts from the lived body and subjective intentionality in order to isolate invariant functional correlations, law-like dependencies between stimuli and responses. It does not aim to explain perception in terms of meaning, but to correlate physical input with physiological output. Its idealizations are of the same kind as those of physics. They transform the open horizontal structure of perception into systems of exact dependencies amenable to mathematical modeling. What is significant for Husserl is that the stimuli whose perception is studied in psychophysics are not the life world rich objects of perceptual experience, things as centers of action and change, given in a flux of stable things amidst motion, but a mathematically substructed life world in which stimuli are assumed to be given as mathematical patterns. The stimuli used in psychophysics experiments and in ANNs are mathematical regularities like the frequency of a sound, the luminance of a light, or the interval of a metronome beat. So the world is already abstracted or mathematized before the psychological processes ever get involved. This means that experience is reduced to static stimuli, scalar thresholds, and just noticeable differences. Psychophysics was motivated to close the gap between experience and the exact mathematized phenomena that is the ideal of physics, which, as we've seen, is the inner logic that motivates the expansion of science, and did so by mathematically idealizing the perceptual experience side of the gap. Initially, these laws of active psychophysical processing, according to which we associate stimuli with each other, were assumed to be exact, like the exact laws of physics. However, psychophysics struggled in life world environments outside of the lab, and where perception exhibits both stability and change, making laws applicable only in controlled conditions. In real world environments, psychophysical laws broke down. This led Egon Brunswick to propose a probabilistic turn in psychophysics, where perception was seen as a process of probabilistic sampling to infer a stable world from noisy, uncertain data. Instead of deterministic stimulus response functions, perception was modeled as a probabilistic inference problem. These ideas ultimately motivated Rosenblatt's development of probabilistic ANNs, where perception and learning were modeled as probabilistic weight updates rather than deterministic laws. Rosenblatt opens his 1960 Principles of Neurodynamics, which introduced probabilistic ANNs, with a quote from Brunswick. This meaning origin of the motivations internal to ANNs clarifies why the major discoveries within ANNs were themselves advances in physics, such as Hopfield networks and Boltzmann machines. These were not interdisciplinary discoveries, they were physics discoveries. The architecture and training of ANNs follow the same idealizing orientation. Their core mechanism, gradient descent, backpropagation, energy minimization, they all derive from principles in statistical physics and optimization theory. ANN architectures do not model consciousness or meaning. They extend the mathematization of perceptual regularities into high-dimensional probabilistic spaces. It's why the Nobel Prizes received by John Hopfield and Geoffrey Hinton for their work in AI were the Nobel Prizes for physics. But this also exposes the common misinterpretation of this achievement. In idealizing the structures of perception into mathematized stimulus response functions, ANNs abstract away from the intentional structures of categorical intuition that constitute meaning expressed in language. Meaningful categorical unities, what Husserl calls morphological essences, are not given by the sensory manifold itself, but constituted through the layered intentional activity of the subject. ANNs, like psychophysics, operate instead on exact essences, idealized statistical representations of stimuli abstracted from any embodied perspective. The success of ANNs in modeling perception thus comes at the price of a structural forgetting, a bracketing not only of the life world, but of the very activity through which the life world becomes meaningful. The apple becomes a cluster of pixels, the face a set of landmarks, the person a latent variable. The how of appearance, its unfolding in time, its openness to revision, its embeddedness in bodily movement and cultural significance is all lost. There is thus a structural asymmetry between the models of physics, which include psychophysics and ANNs, and the models of mathematical logic. Each formalizes and mathematizes a different layer of natural cognition, perceptual regularities in the first case, and categorial or linguistic relations in the second case of um, in the second case. In cognition, though, these two layers are never separate. Now, attempts to combine these models, usually under the heading of sensory grounding of symbolic models, succeed only in fusing static representations, static patterns of stimuli aligned with a fixed inventory of models. Such hybrid systems can generate images from categories expressed in language, or they can annotate images with linguistic categories. But what they can't do is clarify or revise or discover categories themselves. Clarification requires a responsibility to the world in its openness, not merely correlations between pixels and labels. To expect from sensory grounded models the object persistence and categorical novelty that belong to lived perception is therefore to misinterpret both their promise and their purpose. This split between morphological and exact essences echoes Husserl's distinction between regional ontologies. The region of physical nature, with its quantifiable regularities, is suited to exact idealization. The region of the personal, the cultural, the meaningful, where we encounter others as bearers of intention, value, and normativity, resists such reduction. When psychophysics is taken as a theory of cognition, or when ANNs are interpreted as models of understanding, this ontological distinction collapses. What results is not scientific progress, but a new form of psychologism, the attempt to explain judgment, truth, and meaning in terms of subpersonal causal mechanisms. This is in no way to deny the power of ANNs. Just the opposite. It is to recognize the kind of achievement they represent, not a theory of mind, but a continuation of the Galilean idealization of the world. ANNs model statistical invariance, not intentional meanings. They simulate the formal echo of perception, but not its lived structure. Their success in perception and robotics and as tools for research in physics and chemistry should be celebrated for what it is, the probabilistic extension of physics into new domains. Yet this scope also reminds us that intelligence cannot be exhausted by regularities alone. It is also the capacity to intend, to revise, to discern truth, and these acts unfold not in the space of functions, but in the horizon of lived experience. The project of artificial intelligence, symbolic and subsymbolic, originates in the human desire to formalize and extend the capacities that make knowledge possible. Yet phenomenology teaches us that these capacities are not first and foremost mechanical operations, but expressions of a deeper responsibility, responsibility to the world and to the truth of what appears. This responsibility is not an add-on to intelligence, it is constitutive of it. The striving for clarity and distinctness, the drive to refine our judgments, the readiness to revise what we think we know in light of what the world shows us. These are not peripheral features of cognition. They are the very movement of consciousness, which discloses things as they are by submitting itself to what exceeds it. AI systems do not have this responsibility. They cannot care for whether what they say is true. Yet they arise from a research project that is itself animated by a human concern for truth, for discovering, modeling, simulating, or predicting uh, how the world reveals itself. This concern is not a limitation of human intelligence, it is its defining feature. It is the reason we reflect, idealize, mathematize, and build systems that try to mirror the world. Even when these systems operate on language alone or on perceptual stimuli abstracted from any lived context, they do so as instruments of our own world-directed inquiry. The question then is not whether AI can become conscious or responsible in our place. The question is whether we can remain responsible in how we pursue and interpret AI. Phenomenology reveals that intelligence is not reducible to algorithmic processing of statistical regularity because it is rooted in the intentional structure of experience. a structure that includes as an essential dimension the possibility of stepping back from what is taken for granted and asking whether it is true. Fully conscious AI, in this sense, is not an entity to be built, but a way of doing AI, one that remains rooted in a philosophical consciousness of its origins, methods, and purpose. It is an AI research and usage practice that does not mistake its models for the world, nor its outputs for judgments, but sees them as tools for refining our own judgments. This is why the most significant contribution of phenomenology to AI is not a critique of its failures, but a reorientation of its promise. AI is not the end of human cognition, but a mirror held up to its sedimented achievements and a method for continuing its inquiry, provided we do not forget that the world is not in the model and that the responsibility to care for the world cannot be delegated to machines. To think phenomenologically about AI is not to deny its power, but to see that this power comes from us, from our striving to grasp, anticipate, and express what the world discloses. AI, when interpreted rightly, brings this striving into view. It reminds us that all models are anchored in a lived world, and that to build responsibly is to remain answerable to that world. Thank you very much. That is the end of the presentation. And I figured out the issue with
Ah,
yeah. So I'm going to go out and in real quick, and then you're going to see me. So,
fantastic. Congratulations. Fantastic
okay,
presentation.
thank you.
We are already lining up with questions here. Mike, you'll be the first. I'm curious how all this plays out with emotions and all the psychotherapies, free psychotherapy we have through ChatGPT or other models. Ken, welcome back. Oh, we can finally see you. We don't hear you yet, but I will.
Yeah, thanks for everyone's patience.
Of course. So, Mike, go
Oh,
ahead.
oh, great talk. Thank you. It was so clear. I think I speak for everyone when I said that I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you very much.
Um, and the following isn't an objection. I just think that it might be something that's like intuitively widespread as just like a knee-jerk reaction
Yeah.
to this kind of program. And I'm not actually sure that I don't think it's an objection at all, actually. I think what you said enough is enough to dodge it. But it just seems like it's a natural thing for somebody who's like phenomenologically sympathetic to ask.
Hmm.
And that is to say something like, first, first of all, artificial intelligence can exist even if it fails to simulate human intelligence. Does that make sense? Like artificial intelligence, it's intelligent, right? Yeah, but it may not be human intelligent, and there's no reason to think that we are somehow the standard of intelligence like that, right? Okay, so that's the one thing that's related to the what I would take to be like a knee-jerk reaction, and the knee-jerk reaction is how do you get consciousness out of this type of approach?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or
So,
is it not relevant? Or is it not relevant? It may
right.
not be
So,
relevant
yeah, yeah,
on,
yeah.
on your
So,
view because you're saying, oh, it's not conscious. We just use it and we are conscious. That's cool.
exactly.
But I take it the ambition for some engineers or
Yes. Absolutely.
scientists, yeah. How do we get or
So,
don't we have not to worry about it or whatever? Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
yeah, that's exactly right. So, what's great about Husserl is that Husserl kind of provides a third way through these issues because you have, the kind of the boosters of science and technology, and then you have skeptics, and then you have Husserl in the crisis offering a third way that accounts for both. And so that's sort of what I'm trying to articulate here is what if Husserl of the crisis would say about AI is that AI is a wonderful achievement, and to think that AI, that achievement is to be conscious, is to completely misinterpret the nature of the wonderful achievement of AI. And that this is not unique to AI. This has been the case since the 17th century, since the dawn of classical physics. That whenever we have these, scientific innovations, we always substruct the life world from which they initially arose with the achievements themselves. In fact, as he also writes, in origins of geometry and language, I mean, that's just how language works too. Um, we forget its origins. And so that's what I would, so that is kind of like I think the Husserlian answer to the consciousness question is um, not not to say, oh, no, AI can't become conscious, or yes, that is a reasonable aspiration, but that the question itself misunderstands the meaning and origin and promise and what to be excited about from AI. But that requires a rediscovery of its original meaning in the same way that Husserl sort of rediscovers the original meaning of physics in Section 9 of the Crisis. Yeah.
Mark.
Hi, Ken. Very interesting.
Hi.
As far as I understand, you work part or full time at Microsoft, right?
Yeah, I work full time.
Okay, then let me ask you from that perspective, what sort of engineering predictions would you be willing to make in terms of what essential limitations or lack thereof? Um, so that's my first question in broadly, but let me be a little bit more specific if you
Mhm,
need a direction.
mhm.
I'm a mathematician, and I've been fairly amazed at the ability of modern AI to create new proofs and new algorithms
Yeah.
to date. I mean, it's already happened. But as a mathematician, I regard the real job of mathematicians um, to distill new mathematical concepts out of experience. I'll give you an example, right? So human beings have understood what symmetry is on an informal level for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And yet, about 200 years ago, a mathematician sat down and said, okay, what's the essence of symmetry? And out of that came group theory.
Yeah.
And to date, at least as far as I'm aware, no AI has done anything close to this, which I regard as personally the essence of
Yes.
mathematics. So, with respect to what I asked first about
Yeah.
limitations, if an AI in a week or a year actually invented a new mathematical object
Yeah.
and distilled an intuition into a mathematical object like symmetry to group theory,
Yeah.
would it surprise you?
Uh, yes. So mathematics, as more mathematicians like you are, who do are very aware of, has a lot of creativity involved. And yeah, no, I it's that I would not. That's exactly the type of thing that I would say reflects a misunderstanding of what we have to hope for from AI. And it's not that we shouldn't be hopeful, but we should. Uh, why can't we be hopeful about an area of science and technology without expecting it to do things that are unreason that makes no sense given its origins? Um, and yes, so you know, develop. You could not train an AI up until some point in the history of mathematics, like 1850 or 1900, and expect to get the next decade. That's what I would say because um,
Mm.
that is a process. So of mathematics ultimately um, involves a reflection on on structures and this is Husserl's philosophy of mathematics that just like the syntax that we reflect upon in our propositional achievements Well, this is also the origin of mathematics, is the structures that we reflect on in our life world experience of the world. It's these structures that then at first become geometry and arithmetic, but then become progressively higher math. So reflecting upon symmetry. Reflecting upon symmetry itself is not something that an artificial intelligence could do. But once we have achieved that reflection and we have accomplished that, yeah, then we can put that structure in motion, and then we can automate that through artificial intelligence.
Okay, let me make sure I understand
Yeah.
what you're claiming is possible and impossible. So if in a week an LLM proves the Riemann hypothesis, you will be like, wow, but you won't have to change your opinion. On the other hand, if an LLM were to distill an essence in the way that um, the original group theorist distilled the essence of symmetry into a short list of axioms,
That's
you
right.
would have to reconsider. Is
That's
that
right.
is that a summary of your position?
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question.
David. Yeah.
Oh, I think, David, you're on mute.
The hand symbol wasn't showing up. So I was taking it the ghost of Bob Sokolowski was quieting the David Ruder Smith impulses, because we're supposed to be on different coasts of some understanding about the Narima. So I wanted to jump in and say, yeah, when you really emphasize just what you did, yeah, I think that's phenomenology should be on board with that. And I only wish that people had any clue about that in the way AI is portrayed in the press. And I'm a lapsed math major in an engineering program, a lapsed there. So I've forgotten everything technical that I know, and now I work on pure phenomenology, trying to explain what pure consciousness is about.
Yeah.
And then I like the way you put it. We shouldn't be seeing it as a limitation of the system that it's not conscious. It's not, it's a tool. So you finally use the word, first you had the word instrument and then the instrument tool.
Yeah.
It's so obvious, a basic. And now to jump into the weeds of the literature of Husserl. I don't know how to say Husserl in the best way either. Is it 3 syllables or 2? But I like to say, or is it oo or oo? At any rate, Husserl, I just say some sort of version, an Americanized version.
Mm-hmm.
So, I was just rehearsing in my mind. So I haven't played with any of these systems at all. I get the theory behind them, but I haven't been needing to use them or learn how to use them myself. But you seems to me you've articulated just what, to jump into the weeds here, Husserl articulated so much in the second book of Ideas, which was famously not published in his lifetime. So it's great to hear all of this from a student of Sokolowski, and this is great. I followed everything there. Technical detail, categorical intuition, I never quite understood what he was doing. When I wrote in the book called Husserl, I structured it around the ontological categories of formal and material. So categories were formal, regions were material. Mm-hmm. And putting those together is what I take to be categorical intuition, primarily in the copula, the A is F form. But then we spread out, as you did nicely, into the propositional, and then ultimately we're going to get into the quantificational, and then we're often running where I really started, and I didn't know this until I recently discovered what I'd forgotten, which is that before I studied Husserl, I studied Tarski's introductory logic text, which is amazingly still in print. So put it all together. If you emphasize the consciousness which produces these systems, then this is why the engineering part in the back of my history comes to mind. Then you understand the difference between pure and applied theory. And that's the mathematician's terminology to begin with. So I just wanted to bring up where the goods of the phenomenology are. And embodiment is one of the most beautiful descriptions of experience that you get out of Merleau-Ponty, who is specifically kicked off by reading Ideas Book 2.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I am I right on the way you're using categorical intuition?
Yeah. Yeah.
And now I should have to stop in and learn something further.
Yeah.
The categories of the symbols are the one thing, and the categories of our experience may not be the same thing. So there's a point about instead of you're right, we need to think of limitations because hallucinations are driving people crazy and doing bad things in the law and medicine, right?
Yeah.
But that's because people aren't understanding the limits. I understand can't use one of these any of the systems, ANN or LLMs, without um, knowing what you're doing and designing the learning principles. So,
Yeah.
yeah, how can we relate to pure consciousness, which involves this? As a scholarly point, I maintain that the categorical structures inform the development of Husserl's philosophy from beginning to end, and the life world is an expression of the different categories.
Right.
So that keeps straight where are we where is consciousness in our activities, and where are the properties of the tools that we've created to use our consciousness.
That's right. Yeah. My so like in the crisis, Husserl starts by bemoaning the fragmentation of the sciences, particularly starting around 1800 and or 19 yeah 1800, and that the unity of the sciences in any sense of um, that would lead to some sense of responsibility had been lost, and this was a failure of philosophy. But I really feel like it's in philosophy as a rigorous science that he really develops this idea of the unity of these sciences comes from it, pure consciousness. Um, and that we have to understand how, because he starts by, bashing psychologism and bashing naturalism. But then he says, but what's the point in all of this critique? Like we have to have something positive. And then he delves into the study of consciousness from which these sciences arise. And that I just find to be very inspiring and kind of the way to both affirm the um, you know affirm science and technology and its appeal. This is the problem with there the people who are deeply skeptical of science is they can't that you have to account for its clear appeal. Where does that come from? And Husserl is able to do that. He's able to do both by but it's by giving philosophy its voice back as the queen of the sciences, grounding science in pure consciousness. Um, so yeah, I 100% agree with you, and I very much appreciate you taking the time to listen to this. So we read some of your stuff in Sokolovsky's classes when I was a Catholic, and so yeah, yeah,
Follow up just very quickly.
yeah,
Yeah, emphasizing the responsibility to the truth. We always in reading the crisis wonder what a crisis was he which crisis was he talking about?
yeah,
The one about rationality or the rise of Nazism?
right, yeah,
No further comment about
yeah,
present day.
right. Well, I mean, that's what I think motivates. Anyone who's just is gripped by the crisis is, that's part of it. That's part of what's motivating you is that if reason life world reason can't find its fulfillment in science, then it's going to seek its fulfillment elsewhere. It'll seek its fulfillment in politics and political violence. Um, and that's why it's just so critical that um, science is allowed to be the fulfillment of human reason. Um, and that doesn't happen when science positions itself over against everyday reason through this obstruction of the life world. When we tell people, you just have to trust the science if you don't understand it, which is not Husserl would hate that idea. He would say people shouldn't have to trust the science that they don't understand, because then you're cutting off this intrinsic tendency within everyday reason to find its fulfillment in science. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, ultimately, fundamentally, that's what kind of motivates my interest in this. And obviously, with AI, you have very much this potential to position the science over against everyday reason rather than its fulfillment. Yeah.
And everyday reason involves emotion. And Susie was wanting to ask a question along those lines. I step back now.
Yeah, thank you, David, so much.
Yeah, thanks, David. Actually, yes. Can I go in before you,
Yeah.
Mike? So, yeah, to continue on this line, because I mean, from what you're saying, uh, you- yeah, we cannot claim that there's a conscience there or consciousness. Uh, don't you think we should forbid or limit or make, I don't know, to bring some responsibility in the use we do of AI, of, kind of therapy, emotional counsel, even if, yeah, the data are there, like for mathematics, we understood how to handle certain reactions. We know that to a depressed person, maybe you go in this route. For a person in a manic situation, you go to another route. But this doesn't have any intentionality.
Right.
It's an abstraction. Is an abstraction
Right.
fueled with data that is talking to us. Um,
Right.
how can I saw that you have, I don't know what your job entails, but there's the word
Yeah, yeah,
responsibility
yeah.
job
So,
title. How can we make this responsible? It's
yeah,
and we read news, I mean, where unfortunately accidents happened.
yeah. That's right. That's right. I mean, um, so, I mean, I, don't want to get into, um, I, things like, like what should happen from a regulatory perspective. But like what I would say is that what's most important is for people, and I mean, this is a grand task, but to understand the fully conscious, as Husserl's words from the crisis, fully conscious use of AI. So yeah, so there was this case of a therapist. They accidentally revealed through sharing their screen during a session that all they were doing was typing in their client's words into ChatGPT and reading the response. And this is a perfect encapsulation of misunderstanding. Like there's the the deep relation, the intersubjectivity between a therapist and the patient. It's that and the responsibility to the patient and the world of the patient. That I mean, no, that comes from us, and then um, uh, that power is ours, and AI cannot have that power. But can AI be a mirror to our reflections on the world? A mirror to our reflections on our, other people we interact with? Yes. It's a mirror using, a given static set of frozen concepts in the world. Um, I use this word frozen a lot because it's Hannah Arendt's word from Life of the Mind. Um, But what AI cannot do is unfreeze concepts based on an interaction in the world. That's surprising. Um, Only we can do that if we're responsible. And that's what I feel like is most important. But I mean, this is no small task. This is the task of modernity. Um, this is why we have the transcendental philosophy from, Kant to Husserl, and, is we're trying to ground science in the human. So
Completely. Thank you. Mike,
I want to let Hakmanish go first.
or
Yeah.
Hi, thanks. Great talk, really clear.
thank you.
Going to try a couple of questions here to push in a different way, maybe just as devil's advocate.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I caught an argument why the LLM can't grasp meaning and the object and the world.
Mhm.
I can see the argument why it doesn't, because that's not how it's trained. But as you know, the cheerleaders for this are saying, well, that's an emergent property that comes out of the process.
Mhm.
So I don't see an argument why the LLM can't somehow reconstruct semantics out of syntax. There has to be some kind of like a no-go theorem for that.
Yeah.
Now, as far as it's true that an LLM is trained on these syntactical regularities, and then eventually it gets to a prediction process. But it's also the case that in between these two, a couple of things happen to get the LLM to be able to process language at all. And these two things are pretty transformative to language.
Mhm.
First, the corpus goes through this process called tokenization.
Right. It's amazing. Yeah. Yeah.
And that is very different from how humans process language.
Yeah.
And there are these empirical results that show that the vocabulary of the tokenizer is better when it's more different from a human vocabulary.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's something really weird that's happening to language. And the second thing is there's this kind of geometrical model,
Mhm.
right? The vector embedding thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And so that also seems to be something that's transformative to ordinary human language. So I think the people who are making the big claims about the AI models, the neural network people, are claiming that in these kinds of computational algorithmic inventions, they're able to get something which they don't feed into the program from the outset. So that if we want to say that the model does not, at the end of it, actually have reference to the world and the object, we need something like a stronger argument why it could never obtain such things. It doesn't get it from the beginning, but
Mhm.
how do we know it's not able to sort of access it as an emergent property?
Yeah. Well, so one thing with the emergence argument, um, is that it it I mean, it obviously puts a whole lot of usually emergent arguments appeal to evolution, and it puts a whole lot of weight on like what idea of evolution you have in mind, and like I mean, just to say that, well, we could get there because it could be an emergent property in the future because, well, hey, look at evolution. That doesn't feel to me like much of an argument. That feels more like a linguistic smoke bomb. And that doesn't really draw a line from here to there. Um, the I find that a lot of times the emergent arguments rely very much on this idea of consciousness as an epiphenomena. And, the epiphenomena argument, I feel like struggles on a lot of fronts. Consciousness as epiphenomena, with Hans Jonas, sort of um, wrote a great article critiquing that. Yeah, and the fundamental problem is that um, it's combining again these two regional ontological domains. Like one is natural science, which is in space and time and abides by the laws of physics. And then you have consciousness, which is not. Well, so when an epiphenomenal uh, phenomena appear as consciousness, does energy get exhausted there? Is that in space and time? Like, it just seems like we're moving from one domain to another, and we're saying it happens through emergence. And again, it just feels like more linguistic smoke bombs that don't actually explain anything.
It's like
Um,
a category mistake.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
And like, I'm all for considering any, argument. But I mean, it just doesn't, I think the emergence arguments, um, don't feel to actually explain anything. Like you have to actually take me step by step how we get from here to there. And that's what I just have not heard from the emergence arguments. And, you know, so that's my central concern with that approach. I don't feel like the burden is on others to explain why a hypothetical multi-step unclarified emergence from one type of thing to a completely different type of thing could happen in the future. It's the burden is more on the person making that argument to make it more clearly, to say what those steps are. Yeah, to have something to respond to, because there's really nothing otherwise, I think, to respond to. That's what I would say. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, and
Yeah,
then
so you basically answered this question, but I kind of wanted to ask it like in a or narrow way.
Yeah.
And that's because you are familiar with the crisis, and what you've been talking about really kind of addresses the issues discussed in the crisis.
Yeah.
But I'm always curious about what it is that he meant when he opens the crisis with the phrase that the dream of a philosophical science or philosophy as science, the dream is over. Do you
Yeah.
remember? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I've always wondered whether or not it
Oh.
means like I try my very best, it didn't work out, or is it like why won't people listen to me?
Well, no, so philosophy from the beginning was the queen of the sciences.
Yeah.
And um, science for most of the history of science and of philosophy was not like a particular practice, something that scientists do. Um, it was episteme. It was uh, it was a much broader notion of science. Um, and because episteme is just a form of reasoning, um, that in like in Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. And then it was, with the scientific revolution in the 1600s, this is why it's so important for Husserl that science started to sort of become more narrow. Um, and science was the mathematization of phenomena. Um, and so where you're understanding the truth behind the appearances, which is something that only scientists do. And so you actually couldn't trust your appearances, everyday appearances in the life world. Um, and that is what ultimately um, led to philosophy. There was no longer a philosophical science. It was now a non-philosophical science, unmoored from uh, the 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 meaning conferred on it by philosophical reflection on episteme. There was no philosophical reflection on that. And so I think that's what and so ever since then, you have um, transcendental philosophers starting with Descartes, then with Kant, and then with Husserl, trying to uh, give us a philosophical science for this new science, for the new science. And that's what Husserl is trying to achieve. Um, so that's what I would say means. And it's so important because without this, then we lose the grounding of science in what makes us human, in reason.
Well, I kind of want to say some folks within the tradition that's more maybe better affiliated with existentialism. It seems like because he doesn't really clearly explain what he means by that sentence,
Yeah.
one way to look at it is because he used the word dream, that this was a fantasy all along and the fantasy is over.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, you just what you do. I don't, I always hesitate to historicize, any great philosophers. But, in terms of the particular terminology, mainly, perhaps that they use, I mean, you do have to consider, I think that particular phrase would have been written in 35.
Yeah,
Um,
34, 35. Mhm.
yeah. So, yeah, it'd been 3 years since he, lost his ability to publish or speak or use the library. And so it's anyway, it perhaps, yeah, but I don't think it's excessive. I mean, because that's why I say is like, these are, I mean, Husserl, and yet a couple pages later, he's talking about the great achievements of science. And
Yeah.
so that's what's amazing about the crisis is it combines this sense that we live in dark times with the sense that, we live in great times. And and what you get from that is these are actually two sides of the same coin. That's what
Mhm.
modernity gives us, is the crisis and the promise of modernity are two sides of the same coin. And it's philosophy's job to clarify the promise of modernity, of science, um, so that we're not confronted with the crisis of science. So that's what I love about that. Yeah.
Ryan.
Thanks for your talk. It's like everybody here, I was extremely impressed by it, and thanks for your remarks in our answer to our questions. It's um, the one of the things I really admired is your notion of the connection of truth to a responsibility to the world, right, and open meaning horizons,
Yeah.
and but also in the analysis, the Husserlian analysis, right, you give of hallucinations in this context. I think that is extremely interesting, right, as involving sedimented meanings. Um, and so I'm really curious about your perspective, your kind of engineering perspective on the problem of hallucinations and on whether or not they can be ameliorated in some way, whether like just, there's some people who seem really optimistic in
Yeah.
the sense that all we need is just more and more and more training, right? More and more language. And then this kind of like problem will,
Yeah.
like, if not disappear, right, then kind of like be fenced off, right, in a certain way. And there are others of us who think, no, 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 you start with one hallucination and then you have a conversation, right, kind of like a dialogical model, right, with somebody else, and then it just gets worse, right? And I've had conversations with students like this where we start out with one bad assumption,
Yeah.
then kind of like 3 or 4 moves in where kind of like, there's 20 of them, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of
Yeah.
propagated right um, through this process of the dialectic. And so I'm wondering, for most of us, um, this is a problem. Hallucination in the models, LLMs, is a problem, but it's not one that prevents us from using them. Like you can see already, people are using them, right, for everything. But think about somebody like Descartes, who's really uptight about false judgments. And does he need to just wait, right, for the next versions of these, right, for this problem to get better, or is this built into
Yeah.
LLMs and never getting better? As a kind of engineer, what's your
Yeah.
thought about where
Well,
this
I
might go?
definitely don't. So the idea that hallucinations will go away, I think is a fantasy within this kind of an architecture. Um, and of large language models, and no amount of sensory grounding, for the reasons I talk about in the presentation, will address it, because all sensory grounding is doing is it's enabling us to correlate um, sensory patterns with a given set of categories articulated in language. Um, it doesn't give us the ability to introduce new distinctions between those categories. It takes a responsibility to the world, a feeling of ambiguity where a new distinction dawns on you. Um, and Sokolovsky, of course, writes very beautifully about distinctions. Yeah, so no, I don't think it'll go away because you have these unmotivated syntactic pairings, just like you have all the motivated syntactic pairings. Now, from an engineering perspective, so yeah, I haven't talked. So yes, I lead a team of applied scientists and product managers that basically um, add safety and security systems to large language models, mainly OpenAI's models, because those are available through Microsoft. And so, we work on lots of things. We work on different security issues, like indirect prompt injection attacks. We work on, content safety, like self-harm, and we work on hallucination. Um, One of the nice things about working at Microsoft is that it's more business oriented. So we really don't anthropomorphize that much. So we actually cannot use the word hallucination. We have to use the word ungrounded um, in our public communications. And so, like the things that it's precisely because I and others in my team don't think that hallucination will go away. It's precisely because of that we're trying to build post hoc systems. Um, the team, some of them,
Guardrailing.
yeah, guardrails,
Yeah.
to try to improve this grounding problem. Um, uh, Amazon Web Services has a team called Bedrock Guardrails. That's basically the equivalent of my team at Microsoft. And they've done amazing work, probably the best work that there is in this regard. So they're a little ahead of us. But it's all after the fact guardrails because we don't see, but these are the two companies that don't have a lab inside the company. And so maybe it sort of insulates us a little bit from the groupthink that can happen in the labs. And we have to focus on businesses. And I must say that I can't tell you how much I'm enjoying this conversation. The, um, it, well, on the one hand, having been learned phenomenology with Sokolovsky, obviously this idea, as David was saying, the East and West Coast, and um, uh, some frustration with Dreyfus's reading and the decades and decades of people who learned Husserl, not through Husserl, but through Dreyfus.
Mhm.
On the other hand, but like like a lot of times people don't know what to do with me in academic context because they get excited that, oh, here's someone in AI who's engaging philosophy, but they're expecting it to be like they're analytic philosophy, and they're not expecting something like this. And so there's this kind of frustration of like, well, hold it, and because Husserl is hard to read, and transcendental philosophy, what does transcendental philosophy have to do with, you know? And so like, this is really a uniquely great audience for people, for me, and just because you all, it makes sense to you, the connections here, um, and so I very much appreciate that.
Oh yeah. No, thank you for this talk, right? You're definitely speaking our language.
Yeah, yeah. I moved to California 11 years ago. I'm from DC when I went to Catholic. Yeah. So I was crossing my fingers for a question from Jeff. But
So you have to go to
Yeah, Ken, this is a strange situation. We do such similar work, and
yeah,
we're crossing. I took extensive notes. I have a lot of quibbles, to be honest,
yeah,
all
yeah,
over because we're dealing with such similar material, but in slightly different ways. But I
yeah,
certainly like the big picture and the issues you're taking up, and I've learned a lot from the talk. I'm going to send you an email. I don't
yeah.
think I could
Great. Sure.
I mean, I could try one if you want.
Yeah, right. It's
I
all
know
right.
how,
A lot of time email is better sometimes. And yeah, like multiple people, including my supervisor, including Harold, have told me that I need to spend more time reading your stuff. So, I made a run at it, as you know, like 6 months ago, but I need to make another run at it and to understand your approach better.
We could probably organize it around an email conversation, to the
Okay,
things themselves, right? We could just take the matters up
that's
in the
right.
specific issues. But again, I'm glad you're doing this. It's good to have some East Coast representation here. I'm a
Yeah,
big fan of Sokolowski and of David Smith.
yeah.
So I'm a kind of pluralist. So yeah, again, thanks for the talk.
All right.
I'll be emailing you.
All right. Thanks.
I pasted this email in the chat if you want to have it. Well, thank you so much. I mean, I'm surprised. Yeah, I was expecting as well another talk, and it brings together in a very creative way different traditions. It was
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Susie. Really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for your time. Hope you all have a great weekend and look forward to seeing you another time in another academic context.
Thank you.
All right.
See
Have a
you
good
soon.
day.
Bye.